Among hated versions of Windows, Windows Vista probably comes to mind quite quickly. Okay, well maybe not as quickly as Windows 11, but I still have a point. And Windows Vista is a bit of an oddball in this case, because in retrospective, many people, myself included, have realized that the OS was quite misunderstood, and that regardless of its reputation, it was still quite a significant version of Windows, introducing many new technologies that can still be found in Windows to this day, effectively making it the first modern version of Windows. But how usable is it in 2026? And can you browse the web on it? Those are some great questions, so let's get started. So we need some context, and we need to go back to before Windows XP released. When Windows 2000 was complete, Microsoft opted to consolidate the Neptune and Odyssey projects into Windows codename Whistler, which was to be followed up by Windows codename Blackcomb, and important to Windows Vista, an intermediary release between Whistler and Blackcomb called Longhorn. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about Windows Longhorn because it's a big story, but Windows Longhorn was quite a bit of a disaster. According to a developer who worked on the project, Dave Plummer, a lot of Microsoft employees that worked on Windows would often daily drive the builds they worked on in a process known as dogfooding. This is not exclusive to Microsoft, by the way, it's a general software testing practice. But when Windows Longhorn builds were being used as dog food, a lot of developers found that it was quite difficult to do so, because they could only run for a handful of minutes before they had to be shut down for one reason or another. Eventually, Longhorn got so convoluted and unstable and such a hot mess that for the first time in Microsoft's history, and the only time, they decided to nuke Windows Longhorn's codebase and start from square one. This time using the recently released Windows Server 2003's codebase. The actual OS that became Windows Vista would be developed over a roughly 2 to 3 year period. With Windows Vista build 5112, the final name was decided of Windows Vista, and beta builds and release candidate builds would be released to the public in 2006. And the OS released to manufacturing in November of 2006 and to the general public on January 30th, 2007. And so how did everyone react to this? Well, first off, it should be stated that a lot of period correct bloggers and reviewers were given Acer Ferrari laptops by Microsoft to review the OS, which probably isn't a good sign of things to come. According to Robert Vamosi of CNET, compared to macOS 10.4, Windows Vista felt clunky and not very intuitive, almost as though it's still based on DOS, or at least the internal logic that made up DOS. Vamosi said that Vista wasn't a bad operating system, just a disappointment for PC users who hoped that Microsoft would deliver something truly exciting to finally leapfrog ahead of Apple, and that they failed. Alongside John Kleiman of PC Mag, the two of them said the same thing, and that Windows Vista was nowhere near done with coverage, and that Windows Vista Service Pack 1 would be the holy grail. Self-interjection here, such holy grail turned out to be Windows Vista Service Pack 2. Which is the version of Windows Vista that we'll be looking at in this video. John Kleiman's experience, on the other hand, was quite smooth with the installation, but early problems followed, and that he became more comfortable to using the OS, albeit plagued by mostly minor bugs and glitches, and some missing features, although this was after adjusting and configuring and whatnot some of the settings. On the other hand, Thomas Green of The Register had an absolutely horrible experience with Windows Vista in a review that was released on Valentine's Day 2007. He went full on arson mode on Windows Vista, berating it over too many things to easily describe in a single video. His bottom line was that a lot of its features were nice, but were basically Apple features, but that unfortunately it simply doesn't work very well, and that it wasn't polished or ready, saying not to buy it, at least until Service Pack 1 came out. So Vista was not in the best position. However, Microsoft thought that it wasn't all doom and gloom. After all, they released Service Pack 3 for Windows XP, and that was still doing quite well, even if it's bread and butter. And after the Mojave experiment, they realized Windows Vista's reputation was partially harmed by its own name. This was useful for developing Windows 7, which superseded Windows Vista not even 3 years later. Mainstream support for Vista ended in 2012, while extended support ended in 2017, effectively making Windows Vista quite obsolete. And I actually remember when support for Windows Vista ended, because I watched a lot of videos about it. So anyway, I think think we should now look at the computer we're going to be using for this video. So the PC that I am going to be using is a Dell Voster 230, a Windows 7 era PC that I've had for quite a long time, featuring OEM drivers for Windows XP and Vista, being an early Windows 7 PC at that. It is also no slouch, especially since the only component that I know has been replaced in here is the hard drive, but that's because data privacy, and that is important to me. Equipped with an Intel Core 2 Duo E8400 at 3 GHz, it also features 4 GB of RAM, a 500 GB hard drive, and a discrete graphics card, an NVIDIA GeForce 310, which, while not the best graphics card, is still a substantial improvement over all of the other computers I have looked at, because most of my collection uses integrated graphics. This also means we'll be using video over DVI instead of VGA, as there is no VGA output on this thing, at least with the graphics card in it. So with that, I think it's time that we should look at Windows Vista. So before I get started, I do need to address something real briefly. In my Windows 98, 2000, and XP in 2026 videos, a major factor that I looked at was software that either still supported these OSs or was the last version to run on a specific OS. However, with Windows Vista, there's a bit of a problem here. Most software that still supports Windows Vista also still supports Windows XP. And so if I use that here, it would be a repeat of my Windows XP video. And I think you're probably getting sick of me saying that Clamwin works on this version of Windows. As such, I'm going to look at a lot more of the stuff that Windows Vista came with, since the only example I could think of that still supports Windows Vista but not XP was Notepad++, and even still, that requires the GNU compiler collection, which opens up a whole new can of worms. I should also say, I'm not going to be looking at the extended kernel in this video because while I think it's cool as an advocate of the continued support of legacy technology, it would distort this video's answer, and I'd rather look at this video through the scope of a stock installation of Windows. So with that, let's now look at Windows Vista. Now this is going to be just a Cliff Notes version of some of the software and features introduced in Windows Vista, but immediately upon logging in, we're presented with the new Welcome Center, a sort of home base that features a number of offers and a number of options. Also, because there's Windows Ultimate Extras in this, a sort of add-on pack a la Microsoft Plus, there's some additional things. The one thing that is of note here is Windows Dream Scene, which lets you set a video as your background. Even though this is horrible on performance, it was an interesting experiment that I think is kind of cool and has never been in a Windows version since, even if Microsoft has been trying to bring it back in Windows 11. Some of the programs include Windows Photo Gallery, a photo viewer and photo album program, Windows Calendar, an appointment calendar available in Windows for the first time since Windows 3.1. It allows you to create appointments and allow you to set reminders for said appointments. And yes, they will work, and they will show up even if the program isn't open, which I will say this is a very neat kind of integration. Another new program would be Windows Fax and Scan, which is basically what it sounds like. It's just a fax and scan manager. Windows Explorer also received a major overhaul with some slim ribbons on the top as well as a preview pane on the bottom. The sidebar in Windows XP has also been replaced by a locations thing, and this generally started to form the basis of modern Windows Explorer, at least until Microsoft f***s it up with Windows 11 at some point in the future. This includes a number of things such as the Contacts Manager, which has replaced Windows Address Book, which was found in previous versions of Windows like Windows 2000 and XP, as well as the Games Explorer, which is a game library thing that isn't perfect, but it is fairly decent, providing things like the age rating and the Windows Experience Index scores that the game may ask for. You can also add your own entries to here, but I haven't figured out how to get them to provide stuff like the ESRB info and whatnot, so yeah. While this was also in Windows XP, Windows Media Player 11 was brand new with Windows Vista and introduced a lot more stuff. And now out of the box, Windows has Media Center, an additional media player that is full screen and oriented towards TVs. Again, it featured a overhauled design that formed a bit of a basis for Windows Media Center in later versions of Windows, although it's not the same. For instance, here you have different sound effects compared to Windows 7 and later. And I really like the selection sound effect. I don't know why. Of course, I could go into all sorts of detail on the programs that were bundled with Windows Vista, such as Windows Meeting Space, Windows Movie Maker, Internet Explorer, Windows Defender, and many more, but there's simply not enough time. And now let's look at some period correct software. So regarding popular programs, I'm not going to really be going into many for the remainder of this series. I'll save some good ones for Windows 7, but I can't do anything with Adobe stuff anymore, primarily because I am limited to trial copies XPs, but regardless, Microsoft Office 2007 was released alongside Windows Vista, basically on the same day. And it was basically the Microsoft Office equivalent of Windows Vista, except it was received quite positively as far as I know. Of course, featuring stuff like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, and for a first at the time, OneNote. It also introduced the ribbon in 3 programs: Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. Firefox was still plodding along. I could probably bring up Netscape Navigator 9, but I didn't, and also I talked about Netscape Navigator 9 in my Windows 98 video. But arguably a big spotlight on Windows software would be from Apple. They ported their web browser, Safari, to Microsoft Windows at the time. Something I've talked about in the past, but I should probably shut up about my other videos at this point. And it's basically what you would think: the Safari web browser on Microsoft Windows. iTunes was also becoming quite mature at this point, although arguably some of the Apple stuff could be due in part because macOS was innovating heavily during the days of Windows XP, while the only program in Windows that was receiving regular actual feature updates was Windows Media Player. And even still, that was Windows Media Player 10. But that's going to be it in terms of popular programs from Windows Vista's time. There are some programs I could mention, but I'm not going to for this video, so let's try to browse the web on Windows Vista. So, for web browsing, I'm once again going to be using Supermium, as I used in my Windows XP video, and mostly the same sites, except with one addition. On GitHub, fonts will render properly now, and it is basically flawless. Sites like Reddit and Wikipedia can also be browsed perfectly fine, and as for YouTube videos, they will play perfectly fine as well. In my Windows XP video, I pointed out that there was some stuttering in both the audio and video, and that lower resolutions did not help this. However, this computer is able to play YouTube videos without any of those issues. Granted, this is a Windows 7 era PC, however, so was the computer that I used in my Windows XP in 2026 video, so that point is redundant. But anyway, I think we should look at some gaming now. To start off, there's Peggle, a timeless classic of a game that I've played over the years and haven't looked at in a while on this channel. To say things got off to a good start was a bit of an understatement, because I was able to pull off some very good shots in this first stage that I played. So much so that I was able to get 100% clear, which hasn't happened for me in Peggle for quite some time, and never on camera while recording a video. That was arguably the highlight of this run, since things started to dwindle and calm back down after that. And by the end of the session, I was struggling to complete levels, which is a sign that I need to probably practice with this game a bit more. Next up, there's Bejeweled 2, a spin-off from the usual Bejeweled series, where instead of doing the usual match 3, you have to rotate the gems to make a match. It was released during the days of Windows Vista, and it's quite fun. I was able to pull off some fairly decent moves in here. Another title is Touhou 10 Mountain of Faith, which was based off of a new engine. Designed to be easier for some, I was able to get to stage 4 and defeat the mid-boss before I got the game over screen. I opted for Reimu, and if you're wondering why I opted to do a full playthrough instead of the practice mode, it's because they really want you to play through the whole stage or something before you can play in the practice mode. I've pointed this out in previous videos, but because of the way things were in my Windows Vista in 2025 video, I had to do a full playthrough. Portal is another iconic Windows Vista era game, which is a Valve title that requires a bit of strategy and thinking. I thought it would be funny to soft lock myself in Test Chamber 5, which I opted to do, and even still, I was able to get through numerous test chambers with ease, such as ones with the energy pellet, and the first one to have a floor that you can't touch. And last but not least, Command & Conquer 3, Tiberium Wars. This is designed for Windows Vista 32-bit, but I was able to get it working on Windows Vista 64-bit because obviously, and I opted for the first campaign, which takes place in North Carolina. I was able to overcome numerous nod forces quite easily, albeit I may not have been the most competent with it, but hey, that's why there's this cool cannon thing. And that basically sums up Windows Vista in 2026. To conclude, Windows Vista is still very much usable in 2026, piggybacking on Windows XP's program support with a few additions, and web browsing on it is actually fairly decent. Unlike XP, it doesn't have font rendering issues, meaning that it is even more usable than Windows XP in 2026. With its seamless integration of its preloaded software, I kind of wonder what it's like to daily drive it. But that will have to wait for another day. Anyway, do you agree with my opinion. Do you still use Windows Vista in 2026? If so, what was it like? Did you use Windows Vista back in the day? If so, also what was it like? Did I forget to bring up something, or could I do something to improve my content? If you enjoyed this video or have anything to say, feel free to let me know down below in the comments section, and feel free to give this video a like. But that's going to do it for this video, so thanks for watching and have a nice day.